Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. It is such a pleasure to have you all joining us today. For those of you who haven't met me yet, my name is Jess Reedy, and I'm the Senior Policy Engagement Officer here at the Government Outcomes Lab. I will tell you a little bit more about what that all means in a moment, but I will be moderating the session today. So you will be seeing a lot of me. And we will now get going with our Engaging with Evidence session. So John, can I invite you to pop those slides on the screen? Thank you. So hopefully you'll all be able to see me, and you'll also be able to see the screen with our presentation for today and the slides. If you have any questions or any technical issues throughout the session, I've got some wonderful colleagues who are also online, and they will be there ready to help. So John is particularly keeping an eye on the Zoom things. You can send him a message on Zoom and he will help out. So today's session is on building gender equity in skills and employment, lessons from India's skill impact bond. And we are going to be joined by a wonderful panel of presenters. This is part of our Engaging with Evidence series. And so I imagine a number of you will be familiar with this. John, can I ask you to go to the next slide, please? But for those of you who are completely new to us, we are based at the Blavatnik School of Government with the Government Outcomes Lab, or the Go Lab, and that is part of Oxford University. We are a centre of expertise, is how we like to call ourselves. When we were originally set up in 2016 as a partnership with UK government and Oxford University, particularly looking at how to do cross-sector partnerships well, how to do outcomes-based work well. So one mechanism that we especially look at is social impact bonds, which are also now known as social outcomes partnerships. So if you have any confusion there throughout the session, sometimes they're referred to as different things, but a social impact bond and a social outcomes partnership are exactly the same thing, and they're a form of outcomes contracting. And so at the Go Lab, one thing that we are really passionate about is, as you may expect, we do a lot of academic research, but we really want to make sure that the research doesn't just stay with us and doesn't have any impact, but instead is getting to those people who can really use it, who will find it helpful, that's being informed by the questions that people are actually asking in government, on the ground, with all of this work from around the world and in the UK. And so our work is now much more diversified, and we work with organisations all around the world, and we look at work that's based all around the world too. And this is part of our Engaging with Evidence series today. And this series is a series we created especially capturing the heart of a lot of what we do at the Go Lab, and also a lot of my work as a policy engagement officer. We really want to make sure that we are distilling some of the key research findings, not just our own, but from others in the field. So today we will be hearing about the skill impact bond, which is based in India. And it's an opportunity to bring together people from all different sectors, so across policy, academia, practice, and we've got a real range of perspectives on our panel today as well, which reflects this, so that we can join together to learn about best practice, to drive forward our work, to ask questions of one another, and to share these insights. So today, it is going to be an interactive session. If you have been before, you will know the way we do things is very much we want to hear from you, use the Zoom chat and make the most of that. We will be having an interactive discussion in the second half, so you can use the raise hand function to ask questions during that. But also in the first part, we will be having a presentation. So please be thinking about your questions during that, and you can put them in the chat as the presentation's going on. I'll be keeping an eye out for them and making a note, and we'll come back round to them later. So next slide, please. Today we have two parts of the session, as I've alluded to. The first part will be a presentation of some of the key findings, the latest findings from India's skill impact bond, and that will be done by Falasha and Divya, who I will get to introduce themselves properly in a moment for you. And then in the second half, we will have a wider discussion of these findings and the implications and the wider relevance and learnings, where we'll also then be joined by the rest of our panel. Next slide, please. So I said it'll be interactive, so I think we've already begun. Great job. But please, can I invite all of you to introduce yourselves on the chat? I will pause for a moment as you do that. But we'd love to hear who you are and where you're joining from. So please come and say hi. Great to see Andrea and Huli and Leah. Sophie, hello. Amita from London, not too far from us then. Great to have you. You've got people coming from India as well. Hi, Steve. Hi, Cheng. So we've got some more Oxford people. Oh, Joshua from Singapore. More from India. We've got someone from South Africa. It really is a global group today. Please do keep introducing yourselves in the chat. It'd be great to hear from everyone. But without further ado, while you keep on introducing yourselves, can I invite Divya and Falasha to bring yourselves off of mute and maybe could you tell us a little bit about yourselves, who you are, what you do, what your job titles are, and then I'll hand over to you to begin with our presentation for today.
Thank you, Jess, and thank you so much for having us here today. We're absolutely delighted to be here and also to share this panel with our wonderful group of panelists, each of whom are immensely inspiring for us. So thank you. I'm Divya Nambia, and I lead OPM's global work on youth skills and livelihoods, and I'm a principal consultant at OPM. Skill development is very close to my heart. Over a decade ago, I completed my doctorate at Oxford University on the theme of skills development and youth aspirations in India, where I was studying how young women enter new places and new workplaces for the first time. And now, more than a decade later, I find myself leading this wonderful evaluation on the skill impact bond, where I get to take a lot of those insights and create evidence around this particular theme. So very particularly delighted to do this. Before joining OPM, I was working with the Government of India's Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship as a senior consultant, where I advised on national skill development policy and program initiatives for 3 years. And at OPM now, we work on evaluating a wide range of programs. So absolutely delighted to be here. Thank you. Over to you, Falasha.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. It's just an absolute pleasure to be here and to present to the same group of people where, I've been attending Engaging with Evidence series since many years, several years. So it's a pleasure to be a part of the other side today. I'm Falasha Nagpal, and I work at Oxford Policy Management. I've been here for about 5 years now, and I lead our work on livelihoods and social inclusion. And so this project is particularly close to my heart. Before this, I was working with India's Economic Advisory Council with the Government of India. And just very, very delighted to be here and engage with everyone.
So we'll start by just giving you an overview of the Skill Impact Bond and what is this program really about. So if you can move to the next slide. Skill Impact Bond is an innovative program structured as a development impact bond. It aims to train 50,000 young people, 65% of whom will be young women, over a 4-year period in employability skills. And this program was launched at a very unique period in India's history. Over the last decade or so, skill development has been a key policy priority in India. A whole range of new innovative policy and program interventions were launched. And the reason behind that big focus was one, demographic. So as the statistic here shows, India aims to add over 41 million young people to the workforce by 2030. And even conservative estimates show that 8 to 10 million young people are entering the workforce every year. Also at this juncture, workplaces are incredibly dynamic. They're changing at a very rapid rate. The kinds of skills that one needs to be employed are changing, and often young people who are waiting to be employed don't have those skills, which is why there's a huge focus from the National Skill Development Corporation and other actors on upskilling and reskilling and preparing this young population for employability skills. statistics actually show that only 4% of the workforce is formally skilled. And while they may have opportunities for informal skilling or skilling through non-formal channels of learning, employability remains a key problem. And to add to this, unemployment is also a key challenge, where a number of young people are staying out of work, and lack of skills is a key deterrent there too. But there's one additional point which actually exacerbates all these challenges. That is, half of our workforce, which is young women, seem to be particularly badly off. We have a declining labor force participation rate in India, and we actually find that there are a whole range of structural factors that actually prevent women from staying on at work. And this is a problem that a number of policymakers and program implementators are grappling with. So just an analysis of data on skills programs in India itself show that out of every 100 women enrolled in skills training programs, 99 may get the training. Out of that, 84 will get a certificate and they'll be assessed. 46 will get job offer letters. But out of those 46, 26 accept the offers and join the job. But if you go back 3 months later, only 10 stay on for jobs. And this is an alarming statistic. And we need to understand why this happens. So Skill Impact Bond was launched to fix this gap, to ensure that people don't keep dropping out and ensure women stay on in jobs, but also to generate evidence on what's really happening that's creating this. So please move to the next slide. So in Skill Impact Bond, we're redefining success of skills training, and we are looking at 3 key indicators. The first is certification, which is the process by which a candidate's skill levels are assessed on the basis of an independent third-party assessment agency. So once a trainee completes the skills training program, they're certified when they get the certificate. The second metric of interest is placement. So placement is very specifically defined. It's not just getting an offer letter, but it is actually joining a job. So they actually need to be employed. And the third most important metric, one that is often not tracked, is retention, where a candidate is employed in a job for a total of at least 3 out of 4 months from their first day on the job. And this entire program is structured in a development impact bond, as we'll see in the next slide, where there are 2 key parties. We have the risk investors who put in the upfront capital to train young people through a range of training partners. And then the outcome funders who then reimburse the risk investors and pay back the risk investors for their investment, conditional to achieving these 3 key outcomes. So we are very fortunate today that we have the risk investors represented by the National Skill Development Corporation and Dr. Archana here on the panel. We have the outcome funders side also represented in a sense by SIF with Vandana here. And the transaction manager is the one who holds us all together, convenes us, and makes us all accountable. And that is the British Asian Trust. And they truly do a fabulous job. They're so really delighted to have Anushri here with us. And we also have a range of technical partners, USAID and the British High Commission supporting us, and Dalberg Advisors as the performance manager. So now that we know how the bond is structured, let's move to the next slide. And we'll share a little bit more about what is OPM's role. So OPM, we're an international development consultancy firm headquartered out of Oxford, and we have offices in a number of countries, including in India. And our role is actually twofold. Our first primary role is to verify the outcomes to inform payments. So we verify outcomes on certification, placement, and retention. And we do so through participant surveys. And we also triangulate what we find in surveys through documentary evidence. But the second equally important, and I would say most challenging and interesting role, is that of a learning partner, where we concurrently generate evidence to be translated into action and impact throughout the program cycle. And the aim is to use that evidence to strengthen program design and program execution iteratively, which totally keeps us on our toes. So we have three kind of key focus areas. As the learning partner, we provide insights on the larger skills ecosystem, insights that can be used by policymakers to strengthen program design and delivery. We generate insights on the individual, on the micro perspective, answering very important questions on what happens to young people when they enroll in training programs and transition from training to work. There's very limited evidence on this topic in India, and there are very few in-depth evaluations on skills programs, making this evidence generated so crucial and hopefully something that can benefit the ecosystem as a whole. And third, we are also now going to start doing some more evidence collection on generating information on the DIB effect. Does a development impact bond model truly create better outcomes? And we do this through a wide range of research tools, from longitudinal sort of surveys, in-depth interviews, and Falasha will share more when we talk about what we've really found. So lastly, now that you know a little bit about the methods, let's share a little bit about what have we found so far halfway through the skill impact bond. Over to you, Falasha.
So, as in any outcomes-based financing program, evidence or outcomes take center stage in the skill impact bond as well. And in the next few slides, I'll talk a bit about what does the evidence collected by OPM on the skill impact bond so far tell us. And in the first slide, maybe we'll spotlight who has the program targeted so far. As you know, the program has a strong gender focus, and that's quite evident in the total number of young people enrolled. The number of young women enrolled are almost 3 times more than the number of young men enrolled so far. And what we also find is that most of these young people belong to vulnerable socioeconomic backgrounds. So on average, about 50% of those enrolling in the program have low education levels, having been educated only up to class 10 or below. And virtually all of them come from financial backgrounds where the household incomes are as low or even below 25,000 rupees a month. That's about 230 GDP per month. So essentially, the skill impact bond is providing these young people who inherently have low access to opportunities and resources an opportunity and chance to get skills training, but equally enter the job market for the very first time in almost most cases. In the next slide, we'll talk a bit about what's more exciting and what many of you must have been looking forward to in this discussion. How has the outcomes-based financing program performed so far? What do the verification results show? And OPM having completed the verification exercise for the first 3 cohorts of the program, these are the results. If we talk about women, of every 100 women enrolled, 88 successfully have completed their assessment. 70% or 70 of these successfully joined a job, and then 56 of these stayed retained on a job for 3 months or more. Now let's just pause and recall the number that Divya flashed a few slides back. Similar programs have a retention rate of about 10%, which is in sharp contrast to the figures that we see. So in this sense, the initial emerging insights on verification from the project look promising for women. Now moving to the outcomes for men. Of every 100 men enrolled, 92 got certified, 81 successfully joined jobs in the same sector in which they received skills training, and 62 of these stayed retained in the job. Now, if you were to just step back and look at these figures, they move like a funnel. So at every stage, we're seeing that young people are dropping out of the system. And it's quite evident that the number of young women dropping out at each stage is more than men. So in a way, the funnel is more leaky for women. And this raises some very important and key questions if we want to improve outcomes even further for both men and women. Why is this funnel leaking? What are these young people dropping out of the skills training or jobs really doing? Are they employed? Are they engaged in some other activities? Or how are they really faring, say, in the long term, say 6 months after completing skills training, or even 1 year after? And this is exactly what the learning agenda of this program focuses on. Can we move to the next slide, please? So, OPM's role does not end at the verification stage. We actually longitudinally use quantitative surveys to track young people right from the time they complete skills training all the way through to 1 year after having done so. And we use in-depth quantitative surveys to really understand how long-term employment outcomes, how aspects such as decision-making or health and well-being of trainees change over time and evolve over time. For example, one of the insights that has come up from our study so far is that 60% of those who said that they're not in jobs in the long term were actually economically active. They were either self employed or looking for a job, while a third of these candidates were pursuing further studies. And in this sense, while longitudinal tracking allows us to generate some very rich evidence, it's also very exciting for our team at OPM to do such kind of tracking, because in many ways we're creating evidence in a space where very little evidence exists, particularly in the skills and employment sector in the Indian context. And just to take a step back and zoom out, we see that the quantitative data tells us what happens to these young people in the long term. But what it doesn't truly tell us is why this happens. And for this, we turn to qualitative data. Could you change the slide, please? Yes, thank you. And as part of the learning agenda, we at OPM conduct in-depth interviews and conversations with young women across India who enroll as part of the Skill Impact Bond. And one of the key insights that's really coming up, for example, is that marriage in many ways is a dead end for women. It means an end to their labor force participation. Interview after interview with young women from different social, economic, religious groups and from different states of India having enrolled in different courses within the program personally told us in these in-depth conversations with them that most of the key decisions in their lives are taken by the male elders of their family, as you can see through the quotes. So these are some of the key pain points and explain why the funnel is leaky for women. But what we're also finding from our data is a window of opportunity. In across interviews, what has also been very clear is that these young people are highly aspirational. They are highly motivated and they have high levels of self-efficacy. For example, this interview that I conducted in Karnataka about a year back, a girl working in a finance company in Bangalore told me very passionately that someday she would like to work in a big company like Accenture, and that she was entering these subtle negotiations and pushing back normative, deeply ingrained gender social norms very quietly at home, trying to carve out a space and opportunity for herself to be able to continue staying employed. And in this sense, the program really opens these young men and women to a window of opportunities, to a world of opportunities. And in many ways, the skills training contributes directly to enhancing their confidence levels, their self-efficacy, and supports them in really anchoring these negotiations, even at a household level. And this is one of the most exciting parts of the data that we collect. These nuances can only be teased out of the qualitative interviews that we conduct. And so far, we have conducted about 75 interviews with young men and women across India. And the data keeps coming in. And in a couple of years, we're only halfway through, but in a couple of years, we'd be happy to share more. Over to you, Divya.
Thank you, Falasha. And if you can just move to the last slide, so what have we learned to conclude? For evidence to really translate into action, you need to have partners who are interested in evidence and who challenge evidence and who challenge us as evaluators. And I think that is one thing about this project that really keeps us on our toes. Our evaluation team is really small. There are about 4 of us on the core team, and we have a few enumerators on the ground. And all of us are actively a part of the data collection process. We dream about life stories and interviews because we are very deeply connected with our data. But we do that because of this huge group of partners who challenge us every time we present answers to one set of questions. We get a whole new set back, new sets of challenges, new questions to find answers to. And that process keeps us engaged, but we also feel very grateful that this evidence is actually being used. It's not something that's sitting in a report. And just to say, the 2 big reflections so far is if skill impact bond is really like redefining success. We're already seeing improved outcomes at certification, placement, and retention. But what we're really seeing is also if we broaden the definition of success to personal empowerment, active citizenship, sort of greater self-confidence, every story of young women, including if you track people who've dropped out of skills training or dropped out of employment, you do find that that exposure itself has created some positive change in their lives. And this comes back to what the anthropologist Arjun Apadare writes in his paper on the capacity to aspire, a paper he wrote in 2004, where skills training programs, what they really do is they expand that aspiration horizon, they expand that capacity to aspire. And that's what we really see in these programs. And that is precisely why we think there's a huge value in tracking candidates, both those who are the so-called success stories, but we'd equally make a strong case for also understanding why do people drop out, so we can answer new questions and feed that back. So thank you again for the chance to present these findings. It's just a small tip of the iceberg, but we're really grateful to have our panelists, each of whom bring so much rich experience in the sector itself. So I'm sure we'd all collectively love to engage with your questions. Thank you.
That was really brilliant. Thank you so much, Divya and Falasha. I have seen many presentations in my time, and I thought that was really brilliant. It was so juicy yet concise, and I think really accessible. It was fascinating, the range of findings that you had. And I particularly liked that final point you were making about what a difference it made for you as evaluators, making sure that you were being challenged to make sure that the processes were actually improving and that they were being used. And it really resonated, I suppose, with a lot of the heart at GoLab. I see we've got a couple of questions in the chat. So before we go into our full panel discussion, I just want to take a moment to put a couple of these questions to Divya and Falasha to take. So maybe I could start with the question that Chris has popped in the chat. Chris has asked, are there policy changes that you'd recommend as a result of the skill impact bond findings? And we can talk afterwards in the panel about some of the wider, also how government's been engaging in these different ways. But I'd love to hear some initial thoughts from you both on that.
Thank you. I can come in there just very quickly. I think putting the young person at the center of the evaluation is absolutely crucial. A lot of policy programs are designed keeping the young person in center, but actually in terms, the evaluation aspect is not highlighted as much. And it's often something that's done at the end. You count the number of people trained in place. There's often not the time, the budget, or the resources to actually do detailed evaluations. So, embedding a strong focus on youth-centric evaluations in program evaluation, I think would be crucial, because it's not just helps measure the success of the program, but will help inform the design of future programs.
Thank you. And Falasha, do you want to come in on that at all? No, great. Well, then maybe I can pop one of the other questions to you. Saima, I think, I'm very sorry if that's not how it's pronounced, has put a question in the chat, observing that we're asking about the retention of women versus men in jobs, and asking if that the women's retention was slightly better, if that's what you were saying, and asking therefore, can we say once women are employed that there's a better chance with them compared to men, or how's that gender balance? Falasha, you just need to unmute, sorry.
Okay.
Oh,
So
Divya.
far so far there is a gender gap at almost every juncture, but efforts are, because this is a gender responsive program and we work cohort after cohort very closely with our stakeholders to use the evidence and really brainstorm as to how we can improve the outcomes. And what we displayed was an aggregated data. So if you were to really break it down, there have been incremental gains. So yes, the hope is that women do start performing even better.
Great. So it's actually that women's retention isn't as good as men's, is that correct?
Yes, there is a
Great. Okay, I'm going to take one final question for just the two of you, and then we will go to the wider panel. We'll be able to keep putting these questions to a wider group of people. So please do keep putting your questions in the chat. And in a moment, you'll also be able to use the raise hand function if you'd rather just be able to say your question. So maybe one final question. What are the operational activities that you think are making a difference to those success rates?
I get started. I think what is really working well is that this entire program is a team effort. So we just see the last side of it, where we actually do the data collection. But there's an entire support system behind the scenes working with training providers, and I think supported by the Dalberg team, working with training providers to strengthen every aspect of program delivery, from the recruitment and mobilization of candidates, providing accurate information, career counseling, mentorship, so people stay on in jobs. So there's a lot of investment and activity happening behind the scenes that is actually driving better outcomes, and also monitoring. And the beauty here is that side works very closely with our evaluation team. So when we do document checks and we find some challenges or some areas of improvement, we again go back and we collaboratively work to try and iron out even the smallest of challenges, maybe just ensuring the spellings are consistent. And these small changes have huge ripple effects. So I think that's what I think teamwork is absolutely critical as well.
Great. Falasha, do you want to come in at all on that, or do you want to go to the panel? Sorry.
What I said is that on this program, we focus on women, but the focus on women is very deliberate and it's integrated as elements across the project and throughout the project, right from the time of approaching them at the time of enrollment, all the way through to ensuring that they're retained in their jobs through a series of gender responsive measures, making workplaces more conducive for women and providing the support that they need. So truly and meaningfully integrating gender into the project has been quite crucial.
Thank you so much for that. It's really exciting to get to hear about these findings and the range of quantitative and qualitative findings, and just how much that's been helping enrich the intervention and thoughts about future ways of doing this work. I'd now like to bring in the rest of our panel. So we're going to pop them onto the spotlight too. And as we're doing that, can I invite each of you to introduce yourselves? I'll come round. And it'd be wonderful to hear who you are, what you do, and how you relate to this work. So maybe we can start with Vandana. If you want to come off mute and introduce yourselves, please.
Thanks, Jess. It's wonderful to be part of this interesting session and series. I'm Vandana. I lead the Girl Capital work for SIF in India. Girl Capital looks at school to work transition for girls and young women in the age group of 14 to 29. And as part of Skill Impact Bond, SIF is the anchor outcome funder. With a very strong focus on gender. And yes, and as Falasha said, and Divya said, it's been a teamwork to really bring a diverse set of factors to agree on common shared outcome framework and the theory of change, which is truly instrumental to the results that we have as part of this partnership. Happy to be part of this conversation today.
Thank you so much. Archana, can we come to you next?
Yeah, hi. Hello, everyone. I'm Archana Patankar. I head the Research and Impact Division at National Skill Development Corporation. I'll talk more about who we are and what we do a little later during the panel discussion. So I was not part of the skill impact bond when this team was really, working on it to design it and so on. I came in a little later. So a lot of things I have learned later on from the friends I see in the panel here, from Vandana, from Anushri, Divya, Palasha, and so on. But it's been a great experience for NSDC to be part of the Skill Impact Bond. I think this is the first Skill Impact Bond, if I may say, globally. And it's been a good journey for us. There are a lot of lessons that we have learned in the process, and there's a lot of mainstreaming that we would like to do, and we would like to continue with this initiative further. So it's been a great teamwork. There have been a lot of learnings from it. A lot of hard work has gone into it. Um, but yes, we are very proud of being a part of the first Skill Impact Bond. Thank you.
Thank you. And then last but not least, Anushri.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Jess. And thanks for creating this platform, Jess, not just for us, but for all the entire Impact Bond community and the OBF community. It's so important to share our learnings with each other and not reinvent the wheel, and also get inspired from our achievements and learn from each other's mistakes. So thank you for providing the platform. I lead the social finance work for the British Asian Trust in India, which means that I also oversee the execution of the impact bond, the skill impact bond from our side. In terms of BAT's role in this, we were the conveners. We raised the outcome funding for the skill impact bond and have done the contracting, the stakeholder management, the governance, the risk management, the evaluation management, and all other words that end with management, which sort of, we kind of fill the gaps, right? So we don't really have a JD, but our accountability is towards the outcomes, towards the partnerships that we have actually fostered as part of this impact bond, and basically doing whatever it takes to make sure that it kind of continues to deliver the fantastic results that we've been seeing. So that's really our role. Thank you, Jess. Can I also just take a minute to just acknowledge how proud I am of this group of women here? It's an all-women panel, and I just can't help gushing over it. So sorry.
No, that's a lovely addition to add. And it felt very appropriate for what we were talking about today. So hopefully what you picked up from that is we have a wonderful range of perspectives of those who've been really involved with the whole process of delivering this program. So we've got Divya and Flasha being able to talk more from this evaluator perspective, and an evaluator that's not just been tagged on at the end, but actually it's been really embedded throughout the process so that learnings can make a difference, and that they've been very interactive with the other stakeholders in what they were doing as evaluators. We've got Vandana, who is sharing more of the outcome funder perspective. We've got Archana with more of the investor viewpoint, and we've got Anushri with some more of the performance manager. So while that is a very quick summary of the sort of different angles we have, I'm sure that they'll be able to speak to a massive range of questions. And I know we've already got a few in the chat. So maybe to kick things off, Joshua, you've popped a question in the chat, which looks brilliant. I don't know if you mind putting yourself off mute and asking it to the panel. Otherwise, I can read it out.
Sure, I'll just ask it.
Great.
Thanks for that, Jess. So sorry, my question was, what was the highest value addition you feel like to the panel you feel that arose from the structuring of this service delivery under the Skills Impact Bond? And as an extension, are there clear differentials as a result of structuring this initiative as a social outcome contracting, as compared to, for example, a more traditionally orthodox, what we might consider funded service?
Brilliant. So I imagine most of you would have different perspectives on this. I'm aware that Vandana, you're going to have to be leaving a little bit earlier than the rest, so maybe I could come to you first for some thoughts, but actually I'd love to hear from each of you for this question.
I think the whole design of the transaction is a great value addition. We heard from Divya that availability of government budget was not a challenge for India. There are huge budgets that existed. There was delivery capacity that existed, but the system is not delivering outcomes that were right for youth as well as for the industry and for government, which is why we needed an instrument which could really support or incubate innovation. and which is why we thought of using a skill impact bond and bringing a risk investor so that a risk-free environment could be created for the service providers for them to be able to innovate and do what they otherwise are not doing. And the other element is having a gender focus. As against men, women were disproportionately getting, not getting jobs and not retaining in jobs. So there was something that was not working for women, which is why it was equally important to put more focus on women, put the right incentive structures to the right metric, which was gender and which was retention, which could then force the service partners to think differently. And the other beauty of such instruments is a heavy focus on data. So I think these are the components that really worked for us to pilot cohort by cohort and see, the success that we have. We started from 10% as a baseline for women in retention. Palasha shared that we are already at 56%, 5 times, the baseline, and we are seeing positive returns forward. So I think that's the beauty of the development impact bond that we were able to optimize and leverage.
Thanks. Let's go to Nushri next.
I will add to what Vandana said and point out 2 other things, right? So one is the presence of very strong performance management. And we've seen this typically with impact bonds across the world, right? Like that is one differentiator. And what that has meant for us is NSDC sort of, anchors and houses the performance management function. But it is really the ability to have micro innovations and sort of build the plane as you're flying it, right? So this, if you look at the training providers, and I see some of the names in the in the audience, the ability for them to get the data, to use the data for the programming, to be told how to do that in a way that kind of helps them achieve targets. I think that has been one of the huge value adds of an impact bond structuring as opposed to sort of plain vanilla. And then just 2 more. So I think we spoke about the gender lens, which has been instrumental. Now, a lot of these training partners, pre-impact bond, say, for example, we're working with 40-50% women, and through the impact bond sort of incentivization, we've seen this hit almost 70-80% for some of our training partners. And the additional risk of working with women, because we all know women are more prone to dropping out, that additional risk was actually taken away or transferred to the investors, allowing them to take an experiment with that gender lens. And so that's sort of the second thing that has really helped. And then I think there were some questions around operationally. I think the one unique thing that we've done, and maybe Archana can talk a little bit more about this, is the employer lens, right? We've now had demand-driven models, which is one of the innovations that have again come out. We almost focus on retention to start with and not at the end of the value chain. So the entire skilling value chain is turned on its head. And the training partners always had a focus on good quality delivery and certification, but the nudge towards retention came because of the impact bond, because it became one of the first instruments in the country to start incentivizing on retention, right? So when that nudge happened, they basically had to innovate, and through those innovations, we've come across some very interesting operational practices like the demand led model. So I just wanted to come in with that, but maybe Archana can add a little bit more.
Should we go to you, Archana?
Yeah. So from our perspective, there have been quite a few value additions to the way we function, to the way we normally implement the skill development programs. One big value addition has been that we have moved away from our traditional framework of output in terms of certification of the candidates and then possibly placement, to retention as the outcome of that. So we are no longer just concerned about our output in terms of how many people are being certified, but we go all the way to track the candidates and look at their certification, their placement, as well as retention. And at every stage, there is a specific intervention that's being planned to suit the candidates, to improve the performance at each stage. So from cohort 1 till now, as Anushri was pointing out, there are a lot of learnings and there's a lot of performance enhancement that has happened as a result of that. So we have done a lot of course correction over the years, which we normally don't do in our traditional skill development programs because that kind of tracking never happens. Secondly, because this is a bond structure, this is possibly the first time that along with us, there has been private sector participation in skilling. So the money has essentially come from the private sector, from grant making or donor agencies, and they have shown how private sector participation can enhance outcomes as far as skill development is concerned. That brings in more accountability of how the money is being used. That brings in a lot of monitoring, evaluation, a lot of peer learning happens. So that's again something that we not only learn, but we want to mainstream in the regular skill development programs. Then, of course, even in the traditional programs, this gender ratio that we're talking about here is not really present in our regular designs. I mean, it's open to all. So sometimes, in some cases, the gender ratio happens to be more. In certain cases, it's not, depending on the kind of skilling that's done. But here, consciously, we are trying to get 60% women candidates, and therefore the mobilization effort and even the entire support system to take these women towards the desired outcome has come into play over here. So consciously, at the design stage itself, a lot of these supporting things have been put into it. And therefore, the counseling is there. And counseling is there not just at the mobilization stage, but even at the placement stage, the counseling is done so that these women who might have, some maybe some social stigma attached to maybe going out and working, or there may not be enough family support, and so on, are actually sort of encouraged, they're counseled to take up these jobs and retain those jobs. And I think the best value addition from our perspective would be the kind of incentivization which is done at each stage for the outcomes. So over a period of time, there is a sliding scale which has been used, which means there is less and less incentive for only doing certification, and there is more incentive being given to the implementation partners to achieve placement and retention. So, I mean, these are all great learnings which have come from this one experiment alone. And you can imagine how it will benefit if we build all these elements into our regular skilling programs.
Thank you so much for that. Flash and Divya, do you want to come in on that? And also maybe I could get you to pick up, Chris Kelly has asked a question about if you've been able to evaluate what of the aspects that occurred throughout the program made the greatest impact on sustaining employment. So maybe you could also comment on that as evaluators.
I think everyone else has really explained this well, so I don't have anything really new to add. But just to say that in terms of the question in the chat and on the differential outcomes, just to say that it's a bit too early for us to really understand and measure, whether a DIB, this sort of model, while it's just shown success, how does it really work with a non-DIB model? But we are very fortunate that in a few months' time, we'll have a chance to actually collect that kind of evidence for the first time, and we'll come back with that. And we're very grateful that we may have the chance to do that. But at the moment, we don't have that kind of evidence just yet. But I think we will be able to comment on that more. But I wonder if Anushri and others want to add anything on that point.
A small point just to say that we are considering ways in which we can undertake a counterfactual analysis. So we are talking to the NSDC team and just figuring out if it is possible to quantitatively do this. And I know that if we manage to pull this off, it will fill a big hole in the evidence, in the body of evidence around impact bonds globally. So I think probably a few months later, we will be in a better position. But what essentially we're trying to do is sort of use a government scheme or an alternatively financed scheme as a counterfactual, which shows one way of financing similar work and using the impact bond outcomes as a treatment, which shows sort of similar work, similar outcomes, but under an impact bond structure, and everything else being the same, we're hoping that if there are any differences, we could probably attribute them to the impact bond structure. So we'll keep you posted, but we don't have much to share right now.
That's really helpful. Thank you. And while we have you speaking, Anushree, there's a question in the chat that Saima has popped in, asking about how much does having so many different actors or roles in the development impact bond complicate matters? Is this an instrument of choice in some sectors and not others, perhaps? Which I think is a particularly interesting question, given that in the UK, we have particularly seen a shift in the language from what's been called impact bonds, so development impact bonds in more development contexts, social impact bonds more often in the UK, to a social outcomes partnership, where the emphasis has been moved away from it being just a financing mechanism to more like the emphasis being on the importance of partnership, of bringing these different actors together, and that being a key part of the mechanism, perhaps more so than the fact that there's just private investment being added in. So Anushree, and it'd be interesting to hear from the others too, what is your take on having more actors involved?
So just one, I think, the one thing that India has done differently is done these impact bonds at scale, right? So if you look at skill impact bond, it's 50,000 people over 4 years. And while, I mean, the money value, just because it is a developing country and there are sort of efficiency gains, et cetera, it's still a $14.4 million impact bond. Now, I think the ambition with this was twofold, right? One is, of course, to have that sort of end outcome or end impact on the lives of these young women. But we also wanted to set this up as a model that can be then mainstreamed and scaled up. And to do that, we had to demonstrate that it works at a certain unit of scale, right? Just given India's massive population, a very small proof of concept doesn't really inspire that much of confidence when you start talking about policy changes. So part of that multi-provider, so it's not a provider-led instrument, right? We have 3 training partners with 3 different types of training models: migratory, non-migratory, residential, non-residential. We had to test and we had to figure out whether this approach will work across a common denominator and not make it too specific or too nuanced, where then when you try to mainstream, it feels like, oops, this won't apply to me, right? So that was one reason why that sort of happened. And yes, it is a big group. And yes, the design is complicated in the sense of the financial modeling, etc. But the principles are actually very, very intuitive. And going forward, we can dismantle the scaffolding. We have proved that outcome-based financing works. We've proved that retention for women is an achievable outcome at a certain level of quality and at a certain level. It is possible that we may deconstruct the impact bond, we may retain components that have worked, and we could scale this up in a different manner, right? So the scale up of the impact bond doesn't have to really be the scale up of the instrument. It could be the scale up of the principles behind the impact bond and some additionalities that have really helped us deliver the outcome, right? So I think that's one point I wanted to make. And the other point is, does it have to be complex? And I've also responded to that in the chat. I think the context was a little different, and we've generally seen that in countries like India, impact bonds actually carry the burden of doing a lot more than just being contracting and delivering mechanisms. So this whole shift of language, but shift of thinking towards outcome-based partnerships is again something that we kind of started. We started seeing that happen in India a long time ago with all the impact bonds. There is a lot of onus on impact bonds to do a lot more in terms of data, evidence, trust building, setting the benchmark, setting cost discovery, etc. And all of that is possible if you do it in a certain level of nuance, which brings the complexity. So long answer short. And just one last point, and maybe we can come back to this, is around trust. And I know that a lot of conversation in the outcome-based financing is now moving towards relational contracting, trust-based contracting. And there's a very interesting way where trust has been built in Skill Impact Bond. But I will park that, and probably if there is time, I can go back to it later. Let's take a few more questions.
Great, thank you so much for that. It'd be lovely to maybe hear also from the others what your perspective has been of this partnership model of bringing all these different actors together around a similar issue. Maybe Vandana, we can come to you a little bit as the SIF's perspective and the investor perspective of why doing it like this and how have you been finding it?
Yeah, no, this is a very interesting and important question, because it is important to have diversity into doing something like this at the scale what Anushri said. But it is equally challenging to bring these partners agree on common set of terms, common set of framework. There was no reference point for us when we were setting the outcome metrics. What should be the right outcome and the outcome price, because the data did not exist. The data that existed was too broken for us to put any reference or use that as a reference point. So but it was equally important to understand the perspective of a partner like NSDC, which is sitting within the government system. So anchoring this bond with a quasi government organization, I think, is one of the success factors of this bond. It also allows us that easy pathway to mainstreaming, what Archana said and what Anushri also alluded to. The second is you see domestic philanthropy participating alongside government, alongside private philanthropy for the first time ever in India in an outcome-based financing model. Again, it's a game-changing partnership, because private domestic philanthropy in India is one of the key financing channel for skilling work. So it was equally important for us to have them. But it wasn't easy, and having a partner like SIF, which is too much evidence focused, and we came with a very strong focus on gender. We really wanted to not miss this opportunity in creating evidence for girls. What's the right outcome? Should that be 3-month retention or a 6-month retention? And at what price? What are the models that work and can be scaled up for girls? So it was really a learning journey, and we're very happy that all partners finally aligned to the importance of centering it for gender, to the metric of shifting focus from certification to 3 months of retention. I think having diverse actors worked, but it was a learning journey for all of us.
Thank you. Maybe Archana, do you want to come in here as well? Especially one about picking up some of the working with the government, how they've been envisioning integrating some of this work and how this partnership working has been going, especially because it's so innovative doing this.
So since this was the first experiment, NSDC, which is, of course, we sit in the government framework, but we are not exactly representing government 100%. So we are a public-private partnership model. So we are a not-for-profit. 49% shareholding is with the government and 51% is with the private sector. So in that sense, we came with a little different perspective. And that's the reason why we also opted to become the risk investors, to kind of show how these things will work, right? So, of course, working with so many partners, with each of them coming with their own set of aspirations as far as this program is concerned, with their own focus on outcome, their own priorities as an organization. It was a complex setting, but at the same time, the way it has worked for a common cause, which is creating outcome for young women at the end of the day, giving them an opportunity to earn for themselves, to have to have economic or financial stability. That's the common goal that all of us have worked towards. Secondly, this partnership has also tried to work towards setting up a framework which can now be dismantled, which can be sort of tweaked. More partners can come in, different sets of actors can come in. So in fact, now for the next scale up, we're actually looking at government coming in as an outcome funder. So if that happens, that can become a real game changer as far as the skilling ecosystem in the country is concerned, where the government actually goes beyond paying for certification alone to becoming an outcome funder. And then even the way outcomes are defined can change. Today we are looking at 3 months retention. Tomorrow we can look at maybe 3 months retention plus maybe tracking the same candidate over the next 1 year. And then given the diversity of jobs and opportunities in the country, tomorrow we can move from a wage employment based model towards an entrepreneurship model, which again would have the same principles which are there in this bond right now, but the outcomes defined over there will be a lot different. But then because we have already worked in this structure, it now becomes easier for us to visualize what those outcomes would be. It now becomes easier for us to visualize how government can come in and play the role of an outcome funder. If 2.5, 3 years back, when I guess everybody was sitting together and trying to understand how this bond is going to work, maybe this would have been a very difficult question to answer. But today we can confidently say that we can bring in more actors. We would also be targeting more domestic funding in future, which can involve maybe corporate social responsibility funds, which can involve a lot more industry partnerships, which can also involve more aspirational jobs. So moving from some basic employment towards aspirational employment, towards future skills, and so on. So literally the sky is the limit as far as experimenting with this structure is concerned. You can have more actors, you can have more partnerships, you can dismantle the whole structure, you can tweak the structure. So I think that's been the best outcome of this journey.
Thank you so much for that. And I guess one of the things that we're picking up on is just the importance of like what's next and how to make sure that this isn't just a one-off intervention, or that even the initial intervention that it was stagnant and wasn't able to change, but instead it was really important, both the evaluation but also how the different partnerships work to enable it turning into action. Divya and Falasha, I don't know if you'd be willing to come in and share a little bit more about how you guys have operated and your responsibility in helping to make movement from evidence into transforming into action and change, because that's a really active engagement role that you've alluded to earlier.
So maybe the two key words here were evidence and action. So maybe I can take the first part. So as we highlighted in our slide, where we've been very careful about how the MEL framework for the project has been designed. We've made it a point to ensure that we capture evidence at 3 distinct levels. At the individual level, by conducting in-depth interviews with young people, really capturing their experiences, what goes on within the household, much of which is not documented elsewhere. Really understanding what are their motivations for joining the job, what makes them drop out, what are some of the dynamics, decision-making dynamics that underpin some of the calls and decisions that they take. But equally, we also generate evidence at an organizational level, where, for example, we have engagements with training providers, trainers, and other key stakeholders within the ecosystem to really understand what's going on at the organizational level. In fact, as part of our scope of work, our team has visited across Indian states. We've gone to employer sites, we've gone to training sites and seen for ourselves and collected evidence around how do young people really experience training on site. What are the kind of facilities that are available? What does a typical work day for a young person skilled under the program look like? And then finally, at the ecosystem level, we constantly try to understand how the ecosystem is evolving, how the program is engaging with it and responding to it. But I'll hand it over to Divya to talk about how we really transform this into action.
Thanks, Falasha. And just to add, to really take evidence into action, you need to make the evidence understandable. And I think that is often something, it's very hard to do when you're sometimes in an academic world where we just live and breathe data. And I think we really work hard at making evidence understandable to different stakeholders in different ways. So our reports are often structured in a question answer format, which sort of helps answer where we use the evidence to answer specific questions. So that's a sort of just an easy read. Then we have customized learning workshops. So the kind of learning workshops we do with training providers, for example, would be focused on the kind of documentation, and on very practical ways of which the evidence we see on the ground can help improve just how they collect data on the ground. So that kind of evidence is very different from the evidence we would share with Vandana or Archana, who are more interested in the bigger questions. If women are dropping out, are they starting their own businesses? What kinds of jobs do they do? Is migration, are you seeing any big trends in the area of migration? So the evidence has to be tailored. And the last point I really want to highlight is to transform evidence into action. It's not just about intent or communication, but it's equally about trust. And that's where I think to have that kind of trusted circle and a closed, safe space is really important, because sometimes you also see things that you're not sure of, and it's very easy to kind of jump to conclusions. And I think what we've really done very well is because of the kind of trust that we have with our partners and stakeholder, and the fact that we all share that intent, to do something good for the ecosystem, we have opportunities to have side chats, understand why something is happening, and ensure our analysis is informed by the reality of program implementation. And what helps is that many of us, me included, have actually worked in the skills ecosystem as an implementer as well, from the policy side, but as an implementer. So I think having that lens is really important, to just go beyond evidence for the sake of evidence, but evidence to translate into impact.
Thank you so much for that. That clearly resonates deeply with us at GoLab, and it's really exciting to hear about how you've made that possible. I know that Vandana, thank you so much for joining the session. Do you want to leave us with a final remark? I know you have to leave early before you go.
Thank you, Jess. I think the only last word is, while we've covered a lot of ground through the skill impact bond, there's still, some more evidence generation that is required, because we still see a gender gap, at retention or in wages. So there is still some road to cover for us, and but we've done a great job. We now know a lot that we didn't know earlier. And clearly we see a scaling pathway for us as part of this initiative. So I'm really superly proud of where we are, and this partnership that we've done good work with this. Thank you very much, Jess, for having me here.
And on that note, I think it's a really interesting point that Vandana has just left us with about the scaling, the impact, and where it might go next. We've talked a lot about what has happened, how some of that's been embedded, how it's been agile and developed. Two things that I'd love us to pick up in our final few minutes. It'd be really nice to hear from our panel about where you see this going next. We've touched on it a little bit about scaling. And the other thing that I think was alluded to in Divya's answer, also that Anushri picked up earlier, was the importance of trust in this endeavor. And what was the role of that? Would any one of you like to go first?
I can maybe, on the trust one, I'll leave the scaling to Archana. She's better positioned, but I'll tell you the story on trust, right? And trust, I think, is never, to start with, a given. It has to be earned, right? We were bringing together many different partners from many different walks of life, and it was unreasonable and not practical to expect that trust is what they would have to start with. But 2 years out of the 4 years that we now, for the bond, and 2.5 years into this, we can all see that that trust is very firmly established. And just there were, I think, 3 things that worked for it. So one I've already put on the chat, which is, I think partly we were fortunate and partly by design, we had a group of both investors and outcome funders who deeply understood the ecosystem around skill development and women, which meant that their responses were grounded in practicalities. And I've given you two examples. We had a few cases of misreporting in our initial cohorts, right? And instead of having a disproportionate kind of a response to it, the fact was that all the outcome funders as well as the investors had actually seen and come across such cases in their own work outside of the impact bond. And so they appreciated the fact that the impact bond had actually set up the systems, the performance management systems that caught these errors and they caught these cases early on for them to be able to take early action instead of discovering them a year after, once everything is done, right? And so the response really, which was a trust-based response, was to do the right thing here, uh, but also have a very clear understanding and a very clear learning for their work outside of the impact bond. And the same applied to our training partners, right? They have institutionalized some of these good practices. So the trust between training partners and investors and outcome funders has actually been orchestrated, right? Uh, well, because everybody understands the ecosystem and everybody's aligned on the outcomes. Um, the second, which Divya already alluded to, is the use of data, and not just, so three types of data. We have the performance management data, we have the data and evidence on outcome linked, sort of payment linked outcomes, and then the learning data. And to Divya's point, it's the way the data is used, not just communicated, but integrated, and the gap, the bridging gap that happens, right, between availability of data and use of data, even for transaction management. I think that's worked quite well. And the third one, which is actually quite important, is just readiness of organizations to be part of an impact bond. We know impact bond puts certain things on steroids, right? On the training providers side, there was initially a lot of resistance, but probably within 6 months, there was a complete turnaround when they saw the value that NSDC and the performance management piece added to their work. Similarly, I think on the outcome funders side, we were fortunate to have outcome funders who were ready for outcome based financing, which meant they were okay not micromanaging. They were okay not having complete visibility and control on our training partners, which is the prerogative of our investors. They were okay being a few steps removed and to engage with this more strategically, which involves unlearning of some behaviors as grant makers, especially if you're a typical CSR sort of, or philanthropic grant makers, where there is power dynamic, but there's also that sort of urge to micromanage and just control everything so that you can make sure that the outcomes are being delivered. So here you're still making sure that the outcomes are being delivered, but it required a little bit of unlearning and relearning for the donors, the outcome funders. And we were fortunate to have people like SIF who were progressive, and then others who very quickly kind of, came up to the curve. So three things that really helped: the familiarity of the problem that we were trying to solve, availability of data, and the readiness of this particular group to embrace impact bond and what it means. I'll leave Archana I'll ask Archana to comment on the question around what does this mean for scale up and what comes next.
Great, Archana.
Yeah. So as far as the scale up is concerned, for us, scale up does not mean only the greater number of people or candidates to be enrolled in the program, but it would also mean getting more people, getting more organizations involved in the bond. So that would, as I earlier mentioned, that we want government to become an outcome funder. We want more investors or grow more grant making organizations to come into this. We want more domestic funds to flow into skill development. At the same time, there are different groups within even the targets, the targeted candidates. So here you have entry-level jobs, and then you're looking at women who have been, maybe for whatever reason, have been out of the workforce for family or other compulsions. And so we are looking at entry-level jobs for them in this current bond. Now we have to move towards aspirational jobs. We have to move towards future skills. We have to move towards entrepreneurship. We have to maybe move towards specific industry, specific sector related skills, getting industry associations involved in this. so that the demand is there from the industry associations, and then the bond meets with a supply of very, very skilled workforce. So there are a lot of experiments that can happen using the same framework, using a variant of this framework, and a lot of scale-ups can happen, because 50,000 might seem a very large number to begin with for the skill impact bond, but in the Indian context, it's just the tip of the iceberg. So we have to train millions and millions of youth in the country. And if skill impact bond can be mainstreamed into the overall skilling ecosystem, then everywhere you would have outcome-based financing becoming the model to work with as far as the skilling programs are concerned. And that's possibly the goal, the final scale up that we are looking at, that all programs should ultimately move towards an outcome-based framework, so that, retention in a job, maybe some outcomes defined as far as the entrepreneurship is concerned, those are actually mainstreamed in our overall policies and programs. So when the ministry designs future programs, it, automatically outcome becomes the mainstay of those programs. So that's the kind of scale up that, we are finally looking at.
Thank you. We're getting towards the end of our time. We've still got a little bit left, but I'd love to leave some time just to hear from each of the panelists. What is one key takeaway you'd like our audience to take away from today from your perspective? So maybe especially with your job hat in mind. So whether that's as outcome funder, whether that's as more of the evaluation role, we've got a range of different perspectives here. What is one key takeaway that in roughly a sentence you would have people go home with today? Divya, can I come to you first?
Sure, thank you. I think the one key takeaway for me would be that evaluations matter, and invest in evaluation. And I'm not just saying this because I'm in the evaluator side, but having been a researcher, having been worked in government, worked as with a training partner, evidence really matters, because there are so many surprises that come up when you research something. So invest in evaluation, invest in building coalitions of trust and safe spaces, and communicate evidence to drive long-term impact.
Great. Flasha, should we go to you next? Hang on one second. Can one of you just unmute yourself? Thank you.
Yeah, okay. I'll just add to what Divya shared. So on this particular project, I think as the evaluator, given that we play both the role where we verify outcomes as well as we focus on the learning agenda, we're able to answer the whys coming up from the data, and that provides us an opportunity as a consortium to constantly work to improve outcomes and transform the evidence into action. So I'd say a strong learning partner, a strong verification partner, being the same organization playing these two roles can really help put evidence at the center and help drive better outcomes through OPS.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I know Andrea popped something in the chat, but it really resonates with what we're also seeing elsewhere of while it isn't something that will by default happen with an outcomes focused contract, it's something that's certainly been enabled by it, that you can have this live data learning as long as you have the partnership and the willingness to work in that way, so that things can improve as they go, rather than, as we unfortunately sometimes see, evaluation just being tagged on the end and it's too late to actually make a difference to the delivery of the program, and it's sort of a forgotten afterthought. Archana, maybe we could go to you next for your reflection.
Okay, so for us, the key takeaway is the innovation on the go. I mean, there are so many innovative ideas that we have got into this program, and those were like on demand. So, we had to meet challenges as and when they were thrown at us. And I think this is a basket of innovations which is now going to help us in structuring our future programs. So for us, that's the best takeaway from this bond.
Thank you. And Anushree?
I think for me, two things. I think impact bonds do work. And I think the pathway to scale is really to think about the principles and the partnerships that made the impact bond successful, rather than just focusing on the instrument or the tool, right? So yeah, that's it.
That was beautifully succinct from all of you. Thank you so much. And it's been so wonderful to have our audience here today. We really care about hearing how you've actually found this, what your key takeaways have been. So I know that John's already put a link to the feedback for feedback in the chat, but I'd like to just pause for a moment and invite you all to put one word in the chat for you that is like your thing that you're taking away from today. So it may be that you didn't enjoy it, so you can put something like that, but hopefully it'll be something like you found it inspiring or challenging, or you're thinking about evaluation, or maybe it was we've already got trust in the chat. Thank you, Siko. So please do start putting your word in the chat, and I will pause as you take a moment to think, what is your word for today? There's trust again coming out, trust partnerships, innovation for impact, evaluation enabling agility. That's a big one for us at GoLab. People at the center, scale, participant-centered evaluation, innovation, evaluation mattering, stealing from Divya, engaging, insightful. Please do keep popping your words in the chat. And as I encourage you to keep doing that, I'd really love to also encourage each of you who have come along today, first of all, to say thank you to, but to think about what's maybe with this word or something else, what is the takeaway that you'd like to carry forward into your work? We really care about this not just being a conversation for the sake of having a conversation, but to, as I think Anushree said at the start, that we don't want to be reinventing the wheel. We want to be learning from the best and worst practice, from our failures, from our mistakes, from our successes, from all around the globe, to be able to make sure that we're actually doing impactful work that makes a difference for real people's lives. And I know that while we've been chatting on a screen today, and that can sometimes feel a bit detached, just to encourage you, this is all about people on the ground whose lives are genuinely being shaped by these programs. And this is such a wonderful program that we've got to hear about today. This is part of our wider Engaging with Evidence series. And so please do come along if you want to hear about other ones. We've recorded today's session, so that will be coming online in the coming days. So if you have colleagues that you think would really enjoy this, or you'd like to go back on any of the earlier bits, that will be available. And we'll also be uploading the slides, because we know that was a brilliant presentation at the start, and I know a few people joined slightly later on. So they will be all available on our website. We're coming towards the end of this year and the annual year, but early next year, we've already got more sessions in the pipeline. Our next one is going to be on mental health and employment, which is on a program that GoLab have actually been doing, a brand new report that we've put out. And so one of my very own colleagues, Emily, will be presenting on that. And we are always really interested in making this a space to hear from the wider community. So if you have a session you would particularly love to do, please do get in touch. If you've got a new report coming out and you think there's a panel we can pull together, please do reach out, and we will make time and space for that in the coming year. And to highlight as well, we had one session only a week before this that was also based in India, looking at sort of the development space, which may be of interest to colleagues as well who have joined for this one. And so just to say that I think it's really special that these conversations aren't happening in silos, but that they really overlap and speak to one another. So take a look at that. That recording is already online. But without any further ado, the most important thing I can say now is a massive thank you to our panels. Thank you so much to Divya and Falasha for their wonderful presentation at the start. They talked a lot about how they wanted to make sure the findings were accessible, that they were usable, and I think that really came through clearly in their presentation. A massive thank you to Archana, Anushree, and Vandana. Unfortunately, Vandana's not here to hear this, but it was so wonderful then to have your different perspectives coming alongside these findings, to really talk about what's made a difference, to talk about the challenges and the successes and how to drive that forward. Thank you for engaging wonderfully with the questions in the chat, and to our brilliant audience. for asking these great questions. Please do give us your feedback forms, and we'll pop up a slide in a moment where you can sign up to the GoLab newsletter if you want to stay up to date with the latest sessions that will be coming along, or any other events or research papers. And we'll end the recording here. Thank you so much, everyone.